Shall we get started? All right. I just have a question before we get started. Is anyone playing Fortnite? No? No one's playing Fortnite? No? Okay. Never mind. So I won't give you my username then. Welcome to our panel. Our panel is Back to the Future, how global staffing companies have not only survived, but thrived in a changing global workforce and a changing workplace. There's a long list of trends and technologies through the decades that were predicted to kill the global staffing industry. Job boards were going to make staffing companies irrelevant. When LinkedIn started to gain steam in the early 2000s, it initially looked like a big meteor that was headed right for the staffing industry. And now we see an emerging segment of talent acquisition solutions that are based on artificial intelligence and machine learning, and even blockchain. And so blockchain, if anyone's been paying attention to what's going on the technology side of HCM, in the last 6 months, I've probably seen about 40 different blockchain solutions come to market that are focused exclusively on talent acquisition and human capital management. It's become very interesting. And yet global staffing companies are thriving. According to staffing industry analysts, the global staffing market is poised to generate about $500 billion in 2018. Some markets are expected to remain relatively flat, but others are expected to experience double-digit growth, most notably China, India, France, South Africa, Italy, and Sweden, all expected to grow between 10% and 16% this year in terms of the global staffing revenue. So we have with us today a panel comprised of leaders in the global staffing industry from Kelly, Robert Half, Korn, Ferry, Futurestep, Adecco Group, and Randstad, Sourceright specifically. So let's get down to business and ask the experts questions about the global staffing industry. So Paul McDonald of Robert Half, are global staffing companies truly thriving?
Starting right off, hi, I'm Paul McDonald. Are they thriving? Well, I think that you can do some research on the internet. You can look at the investor relations websites and say that probably everybody here is thriving in one fashion or another. I've been in the industry for, next week it'll be 34 years. I start my 35th year after a career with Price Waterhouse. I hooked in early, and I've seen it thrive. I mean, from firsthand with Robert Half, I have seen the company grow from when I joined a $40 million company to about $5.5 billion. And I've moved a few times, just ask my wife about that, and my children. Been married 32 years, but my wife says it's about 8 because I travel so much. So, no, thriving for sure. Human capital's in high demand right now. Within the United States, you named a number of countries. Within the United States, 4.1% unemployment. The stat that I always like to look at is college-degreed workers with 25 years of age and older, 2.1% unemployment rate. The demand is there. And the job openings, you look at the JOLTS report, it's just phenomenal what's going on right now in terms of the demand. So I don't see it subsiding, especially in the areas in which we serve, which is specialized talent.
So there's multiple ways you can obviously look at what does thrive mean, and one is certainly measured in dollars and cents and the growth of an industry. I'd ask some other folks, do you think that your industry is thriving in terms of the solutions that you're bringing to market? How have your businesses changed over the past 30 years?
I can talk about Korn Ferry. So Korn Ferry, 80% of our business was, 10 years ago, was in the recruiting period. Over the last several years, we've done a significant number of acquisitions to complement the business in the talent management space, so adjacent service offerings. So now the search or recruiting business is representing about 56% of our business. And so I think that the collective portfolio of talent management has allowed us to really thrive in different markets and then complement our service offerings across.
Yeah, we're very similar from an operating capital or an operating margin perspective. It was 2014 that we shifted from more than 50% of that operating margin now comes from our outsourcing and consulting business.
John Healy of Kelly OCG, what has changed about global staffing companies?
Oh boy, everything has changed about who we are. What hasn't changed is that we connect people with work. And that's probably the most important part. The aspect of locating work and locating a job is something that is still a very human process. It's something that's met with an awful lot of anxiety. How we do it has changed quite a bit. The regulations that we deal with, The barriers to entry coming into the marketplace have changed significantly. The technology certainly changing how we're approaching the work. Location-wise, you used to have to be on every street corner. You could walk down and see all of our offices across from one another. Now you're doing a lot more in a centralized fashion. So the way work gets done is changing, but what we're actually doing has very much remained the same.
And have you found that as we're going through this process, obviously technology is a theme of what's happening with the staffing industry generally speaking. I think at one point, in the evolution of the space, there was really open questions when BPOs first came out, when RPOs first came out, et cetera, et cetera. Is technology really the enemy of the staffing firm or is an accelerator? And I think one of the concerns that, popped up during that period was, are we going to depersonalize the recruitment process for our clients? And are we essentially going to be, not fulfilling on our promise to do a better job in the process than, folks with great technology would do? So, Eleanor, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think actually with technology, it actually enables us to be better at it. There's an expectation across just our lives in general that the data that's being collected, every action, every behavior, everything is already being tracked. I know that's a little sensitive issue right now, but it is happening. And it's just, but how you use it. Are you helping me understand myself better? Are you helping me understand what it is that I need or what problems I'm having or what career path I should potentially take? If you're using the data to help enrich that discussion with me, then please take it, right? And use it well and use it wisely. And I think that's the part, is that we need to allow technology to enable that conversation to be richer, deeper, and more meaningful and relevant. And if we do that, as an industry, we'll only make this kind of society and this world of work a little bit better.
Have you found that resistance to using data in the way that you're talking about, or the embrace of data to actually create a better experience for candidates and for companies, does that tend to break down along generational lines? Is it, the new folks who are entering the workforce who don't seem to have, the same sensitivity to data, or all those cliches?
Right. That's actually fantastic to ask and think about, right? There's a generational difference for sure. There's also regional and, and regional from a sense of a global impact, right? The expectation. So there are some countries, when you look at it, who are used to it. They opt in. They opt in right at the start. They actually read the terms of service, and they know what they're agreeing to, and they're open and willing to do that because they've inherently trusted the company that they're given access to the data to. But from and I don't want to use the terms, right, the millennial generation, but really just the generation that's coming into the activity of searching for work. Maybe that's the better role, is that they've grown up with access to knowledge, with access to understanding that they can look up and seek things and search for things. And there's no blurred lines with that. And so there's an access to that information. There's an expectation that when they look for something that they'll find an answer, or they'll be connected to someone that will give them the answer. And there is an easier rate of adoption with that particular, generation, or we do see that across the generational lines, and then also the regional lines as well. So.
Katie Molloy of Randstad Sourceright, what has changed about the global workforce, Zoe? Every day I read an article about some factor of the global workforce that has changed. Some of it I kind of go, is this really just an opinion that's being written about to, sell magazines or website space?
Yeah.
What is true? What are the true dynamics that are changing about the global workplace?
There are three that come to mind for me. The first is that contingent workforce or temporary workers are a larger percentage of the workforce today. It's more common to have those 1099 contractors, whether they're snuck in there or they come in the right way. They show up at the workplace often. Websites like Twago and Elance, which I think is now called Upwork, they're available now to the workers so that they can, it's a rate each other network for 1099 contractors if you're not familiar. You rate the employer, did they pay me, did they tell me what the job was going to be, and you rate the employee. How great is that for the future of the workforce? And then the T in my third piece would be technology, and the artificial intelligence that comes into play takes away a lot of the mundane tasks that used to be prevalent. So we're not doing the work that used to bore us, we're doing the work that's more meaningful today. And it's better for everybody. So I think the future workforce is going to see more of that, more contingency, more of that online, rate one another and do the work, and then the artificial intelligence to bring it all together and make it more meaningful.
So does anyone think this contingent workforce trend is taking something important out of the relationship between an individual and a company's brand? The notion of bi-directional loyalty between a company and individual. Are those days gone?
Well, I have an opinion about this, a very strong one. We look at folks' resumes and we say, oh, they've jumped jobs too often. They can't possibly be a good fit here. And the future is really the gig worker. It's the Uber driver. It's the folks who want to do the work when they feel like it. And if they live here in San Diego, they go to the beach when they don't feel like it. And they have a great life. They have good work-life balance. They're very dedicated and focused when they're there. So I think that it's a good thing that they're going to be moving around, and they're not going to be siloed. You're not going to be a project manager in one department any longer. You're going to be able to move across an organization. You're going to move like you did if you worked for PwC back in the day. That was the coolest job when I was getting out of college, was to work for an Accenture or PwC and go and work in many different organizations and see so much. You would come in more valuable than the guy who'd been there for 15 years in his silo who only knows finance. You've been to many corporations, you've seen many things, and I think the future workforce is going to be moving those people around effectively and getting them to the right place at the right time, and not holding them down and saying, you are loyal to me because I hired you and you work for me. It's a different future. Does anyone else have another opinion?
Yeah, I have strong opinions, and they're in concert with yours. I really feel as though, and we've seen this, that it's the constant learning. It's, for instance, in technology. You look at these individuals and you'd say job hopper, job hopper, job hopper. But if you query them, if you interview them, you're finding out that there's good reasons. They don't want to get boxed into one technology. So every 6 months or 9 months, they're on a new project, learning the latest and the greatest, the bleeding edge, so to speak, of what's on, and makes them super valuable. And what also makes them super valuable to the corporation, maybe it's not the brand that they're carrying with them, but what they're carrying with them is a lot of knowledge. And done properly, you marry that individual up with your internal staff that's going to be the leave-behind staff, and you transfer that knowledge, and then that person flies away to a new gig. It really is, in my opinion, been going on for a while, but it's even more ingrained today with most employers.
It's shifting where the relationship lies too. And do you only care about that individual when they're on your payroll? Or do you care about them as a person? And do you maintain a relationship with them and assume that they may come back to you at a different point in time? One of the biggest ahas in my career, I had the opportunity to move over to Australia. And if you sent out to get an SAP development team, you were going to do a big installation. You could not hire that team as full-time employees. The community of SAP developers realized that on that island, there weren't enough large companies that could keep current on their deployment schedule. So by locking yourself into one, you were going to damage your career. So they made conscious choices to constantly move as teams, creating the projects and creating best of breed each step around the way. So I think you're seeing that the individual is taking more control of their own career right now and recognizing where those opportunities are based on where they are in their life. There may be a time that I want to sit comfortably inside an environment and stay stable in an environment. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's a personal choice, not a mandate because you've chosen to join one company or another.
I think there's a shift going on too, right? The workforce is going to change dramatically. So by 2030, you're going to have a skilled deficit based on the opportunities and needs that are in the market. And so you have contingent people that are working in this job, and as we just heard over here with Paul, there's certainly people that are actually taking multiple skills, different experiences, and they have now collective experiences. And with the shortage of talent, they're going to have possible opportunities that they may not have because there's going to be a shortage of workers. So, and to some degree, the experience that you collect, the more broad and fulfilled it is, it actually could become more beneficial for you in the future. So that whole dynamic of the job hopper mentality may potentially shift towards it's good to have those because we're looking for hybrid experiences that can do perhaps maybe 2 or 3 different jobs in the future.
So to expand on that a little bit, you mentioned the year 2030. What's the workforce going to look like in the year 2030, right? What do you think this is going to settle out to be? What's going to be the balance between contingent and non-contingent? And then I've got some questions that may be a little bit beyond scope, but I'm going to ask them anyway. So let's get to the first part first.
Well, there are better people to answer that on this panel that have contingent workforces that they are outsourcing and all that. So maybe I'll defer that question to them. But in terms of the next 12 years is going to be extremely dynamic. The talent bomb, the total talent bomb is happening, right? And we're actually looking at a survey we're going to be doing over the next couple of months that we're looking at about 20 different economies and trying to figure out what is the impact of that. And so over the next 12 years, there's all kinds of statistics about this, that about I forget the number, but I think it's like $8.5 trillion of unrealized revenue risk in the marketplace in those 20 economies is underway. And so companies right now, I mean, I mentioned how our portfolio has expanded from just recruitment to also being in talent management. I think one of the biggest changes that's going to happen for sure is defining culture where you have a significant number of people that want to work from home. The technology access allows them to work from home. And their corporate environments, they're consolidating or even shutting down operations because they want the remote workers to be there. It's actually attractive for them to be there.
So that was actually that second tier question. And perhaps before I get there, would you like to weigh in on the contingent issue? What do you predict the ratio is going to be in 2030? Which, by the way, you just made me realize that's only like 8 years away.
12. Yeah.
12.
I know, it sounds so far off.
You're scaring us.
I don't know if I have an answer to the ratio, but I think that contingent itself will shift from being more of it's not that we're going to look for a temporary or a 1099 or a permanent worker. It's that we're going to look for a position that needs filling. And then we're going to be smart about what part can be done by machine, what part can be done by human, where's the best human? And to your point, where do they sit? Who cares where they sit? We sit at home. Our entire division works from home because they said, and you know where my work is? I work in New Jersey. I live in San Diego. So it's fine. I fly, right? There's airplanes, there's Skype, we do what we need to do. But as far as the contingent, I think it's not really going to be about whether or not it's temporary or perm. It's going to be what makes the most sense for this role.
And if you want to figure out the answer to that for companies, start asking the question about what's your IP. How do you truly create value inside your organization, and what do you define as intellectual property? And that's shifting dramatically for organizations today. You brought up blockchain, or you get into RPA right now. If you sit with some of the analysts, they'll tell you that RPA is going to become open source within the next 2 years, and that it's freeware to go out there. So the way things are getting done are changing dramatically for us right now. It's the agile organization who's willing to adapt and constantly tweak and take advantage of the shifts in the market and to experiment right now. And that's what the contingent workforce offers you, is a greater amount of flexibility and agility in your business model.
So in many ways, what we're talking about here is an upending of decades and decades of management philosophy and decades of the things that people were thought really important to running a successful business. I mean, go back and read Jim Collins' Good to Great, right? That book was written, I think, in like 2001 or something like that. Does any of that even apply anymore? Core values, culture, these things that are brought up. Surely, many of you here have to think about issues such as employer brand, candidate experience. What do those things mean when everything that we know about hierarchy, traditional hierarchy, management, trying to get on as a temp worker so you could eventually get a permanent job, when all that stuff changes, are you guys in the think tanks right now trying to figure out what does employer brand mean?
We are, yes. One of the areas that we're focusing on with employer brand is really, or it's more the candidate experience that I was thinking about actually, is that we're now selling to the candidates. It's not that we're that closed door that if they're lucky they can get through. Now we're the open door where we're looking at all candidates, not just those that apply to us. That's just a small percentage. We're looking at those that we're touching externally and saying, hey, would you like to look at an opportunity within our organization, and treating them more like a customer than a candidate. It needs to be that way. I mean, how many of you have been through, I can't ask you that question, but we've all been through the experience of applying and never hearing back. It's so rude. It's like not returning a phone call, right? So we need to get to the place where we treat every candidate like a customer.
So when you've succeeded in doing that, and obviously I think that there's a significant technology component that's going to be required in order to manage all that. Eleanor, we talked a little bit about this. Won't that technology, which includes blockchain and AI and machine learning, like when we get it right, won't that make staffing companies obsolete?
I think it's absolutely to the contrary. I think it's going to make us a little bit stronger in how we not only connect to our candidates, right, by really understanding who they are, what they want, what could their possible skill gaps be, right? And understanding where and how we can help them. I think you all have probably heard the General Assembly and Adecco acquisition, or Adecco acquisition of General Assembly. Well, that's part of the strategy of helping weave and leverage those that are strong in technology and balancing with our understanding of people and what they're looking for, and how we can connect them with the jobs that we have access to. But also to your points, though, is connecting them to a purpose, and really helping them understand that, because we cannot sell, and we know. I think if anyone has ever worked as a recruiter or tried to weave, the newly graduated student to a career path, that there are some things that were really hard to sell, like the data entry analyst or the financial spreadsheet maker. Those aren't what the titles are, but that's what the jobs were. Well, we don't have to worry about that now with the introduction of robotic process automation and the technology that's coming up that's taking care of those mundane tasks, to allow the students, to allow us actually as leaders and managers to focus on purpose, to focus on solving problems that really matter, and taking the time to meet with clients to understand what their problems are. The evolution of the relationship with the clients leveraging technology is being able to sit down and say, look, we have all this data on market, on your trends, on what you've done in the past, what your employees are saying about you, which may sometimes be difficult to digest. But we can sit down and say, what problems are we willing to solve together? And how do we want to solve that? Is it through people? Is it through technology? Is it through a healthy blend of that? And let's develop that strategy together. So it kind of aligns everything that we've shared, and that's how we're going to thrive. That's how we maintain our relevance, is because we're listening. And we're smart enough to leverage technology when and where we should.
Yeah,
right? So it's
the
exciting.
next 12 years, who knows what could happen. I do know that the pace of change is just, in the past 20 years has been quite astounding. So if you've got, back to digressing to one of your questions, how much of the contingent workforce is going to be present in the future? Today, it's 97% is permanent or direct hire. So culture is really important. Technology is allowing individuals to stand up and be recognized earlier in their career because of the machine, because of the technology. How do you measure cultural fit or AI, or I beg your pardon, EI, in an employee? It still takes humans to do that. And one of the reasons that probably all of us got into this business, because it's a people business. But the computer, the technology is going to allow us to do it more swiftly, whatever those changes are. But I'm still waiting for the day for someone to unveil a good machine learning tool, a piece of technology, and I know they're out there trying to measure EI, right? Because right now what we're seeing with unemployment where it is, employers are saying, I'll take 70% of the job description in a candidate. I'll hire them if they have a strong cultural match and a strong EI, and they're aware of themselves, and therefore they're taking the gamble, because that's somebody that's going to stay with them for a while, rather than turn. So that's more on the direct hire basis. There's a multitude of things we could talk about on the contingent workforce as well.
I do think you have to be careful on technology, though, of thinking it's going to solve everything. There's an awful lot of bias that's built into some of the AI platforms that are out there. It's someone writing an algorithm that's making choices. the idea of homogenization of a workforce when you're trying to create an inclusive culture that's focused on diversity, creates a counterbalance to the homogeneity of trying to pluck everyone into the same pathway. So I think we have to be very careful about some of the biases that are built into technology. That's where you do need the thinking side of things, to pause and look, are we achieving what we want? What is the purpose of your client organization that you're recruiting for? If they're a medicine company that is truly focused on cash flow, and there are plenty who are, versus someone who's focused on producing healthier societies, that's going to attract different types of people. And there's not an algorithm that's going to solve that right now. It's about understanding those elements and spending the time with the person to really get underneath things and know what their motivations are.
Well, this is a toss-up question for anyone who'd like to ask it, because as we've been talking, I think a lot about, there's been a long history of predicted labor shortages and talent shortages around the world. I guess most recently, the trend of the war for talent, which I know that we all kind of find cliche and don't really like to talk about that anymore, but that started in 2001 in the McKinsey Quarterly. And so there's been this prediction forever that we're going to run out of talent, right? That we're going to have a long-term labor shortage. At what point does your business model have to consider training and learning instead of identifying available talent? And what steps are you taking in that direction now?
I think there's an acquisition that was just referenced that's
we made
a pretty
small
significant indicator there.
Yeah, we took a very deliberate and a pretty powerful stance on that. And I think the partnership or the acquisition of General Assembly, I think, really speaks to our belief not only in the skills training and the ability to do that, directly with the consumer, right? Directly with the candidate, directly with the worker, directly with every one of us, but also to partner up with corporations to really understand that, the need. Because for us, I was actually just talking to Katie about that outside. We were discussing that internally, the employers, it's much easier for employees to seek outside training than it is to seek it internally, right? To understand what their career paths outside of their existing company and connect with people that can tell them what they could be outside of their company versus what their potential is internally. And I think that's a major problem that shifts when you provide easy to access, relevant training that is modern, that wasn't built 5 years ago through textbooks, right? And in the sense of it's on relevant technology, it's learning in the way that people learn and consume information that we do today, and that continues to evolve with them. And I think once you partner with that and you explain and you share what's happening, what's happening in the industry overall, what is happening in their existing company and their culture, and be part of that problem solving together, I think that's what's going to be the major change and the major shift. And to show them the difference between this is talent acquisition because you're losing people, and this is talent development and the benefits and the ROI. You have to speak the language of finance and ROI, and then it becomes a thing that says, okay, that makes sense.
Even just look at this event itself. You have the ed tech sector coming together. How many venture capitalists are here talking to people focused in that sector? If you go back to the global financial crisis and look at where companies cut their budgets internally, their L&D functions got ravaged. And so who is going to do the training? I don't think you can rely exclusively on the individual, but if a worker is going to get repurposed over and over across multiple organizations, the logic is for that agent to be doing that training along the way. So
not to be too philosophical about the point, but I'd love to get your opinion on this. At some point, the responsibility seems to be shifting around who does provide that training. And so, going all the way back to, why do we go to school? We go to school to get jobs. Why do we get jobs? We get jobs to raise our families, et cetera, et cetera. when there's a key part in that process that gets broken for an individual or for a family, suddenly they don't have the skills to compete in the new economy or the new workforce or whatever label we're going to put on it in the future. How quickly do you think that the responsibility for training and education is going to shift to companies as opposed to the education system, which I think is kind of, that's what's so interesting about this conference is like the confluence of those points. What is the purpose of learning and who's responsible for it?
It's a good question. So one thought is that I was looking up robotics and who has the most robots in the country. And does anyone here know? It's Michigan. Automotive industry has the most robots and artificial intelligence at work. And I think number 2 is probably California because of Elon Musk, right? Or Apple. But in Michigan, they're having to retrain those workers that have been replaced by robots, and they need it more than anybody, and they have done a good job in some of those places. A lot of my clients are in that business, so they've shown us what they're doing and how they're actually inviting those whose jobs who are being displaced very early on to join sort of the intern pool and look at all of the different opportunities within the organization, and even giving them the opportunity to go through 3 weeks in each department to find out where they feel they can add the most value and have the best fit. So that's one way to do it, of course, is to give folks the ability within an organization to try before they buy.
So Paul, I'd like to come back to you on an issue that you raised a little bit earlier, which is, we're talking a lot about technology and robots and artificial intelligence and, very, kind of significant tectonic shifts that are occurring. And that's all within the context of staffing, the global staffing industry thriving, right? So obviously there's been a very comfortable relationship between the staffing industry and the technology innovation that we're going through. But the great staffing companies, there has to be more than just technology, right? So what are the other things that organizations have to do in order to thrive and continue to grow and provide value to the communities that we're serving and to the businesses that we're serving?
Well, I think, good question. You look at anybody on this panel and many of the people that are here at the conference, and you'd say that the winning formula for most organizations, even in the staffing industry and outside, would be great leadership that's willing to take chances and risk. I mean, it sounds trite, but off the top of my head, I think of, all organizations that have been very successful in this business, either privately held or publicly traded, global or regional. They had people that were daring to get out there and really shake it up. So it brings me to, what to be successful today: great leadership, continuity of leadership. Again, we're talking a lot about turnover here. Gig economy, employee that moves forward every 6 to 9 or 12 months on a new project. On the same token, though, I'll go back to, we provide opportunities for individuals to, if we do invest in them, and reduce the turnover. So if you have low turnover at the top, low turnover in the middle, you attract good talent and grow your own, you're going to be successful in almost any business, in my opinion. And you have a bankroll, so you got to make money, at least sooner or later, I think we learned a lot of lessons in the late 90s, in the year 2000, 2001, of companies that had great ideas. They sounded great, but they weren't making money. I would come back to the L&D. Whose responsibility is it for the learning and development? It goes all the way back. I feel sorry for the student today that has to go and invest it so heavily in themselves that they're bogged down with $200,000 in debt to try and dig out. I know a few people like that right now. So I think it's also important, though, for the universities, the two-year schools, and so forth, to and sell the value prop. If it's a really good investment, you have to present that, and then create opportunity and develop that person at the university level. Then it continues on. But then, if you don't have it, if it's somebody, I know a lot of displaced workers right now that were, for instance, in the mortgage industry. They haven't retrained. They were great originators, making great six-figure incomes with great commissions. The bubble burst in the last financial crisis that we had, and they haven't found their footing. And I keep, when I'm asked, either socially or professionally, I say, invest in yourself. Invest in yourself, find the track. So the employer does the career mapping, if done properly, for the employee to hang on to them and develop them. But if you are in that category and you know people, you have to find a path in that map. And there's so many tools available at this conference or in the public domain to be able to help that individual get forward. So might answer part of your question, but just some stream of thoughts that I might have.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any thoughts about what are some of the more important factors to differentiate on in the staffing industry world besides technology? I mean, am I wrong in assuming that it seems to me that technology has become a primary thrust of the value proposition that's presented by the staffing industry to clients?
For sure.
I think technology is core, but I think you also have to understand the operating model and how the enterprise that you're servicing makes money. And if we look just at a foundational level, most organizations over the last 15 years created shared services or centralized models for a reason. It created risk mitigation for them because you standardized what you're doing and you reduced the complexity of what's there. It also gave an opportunity to create scale, so you could do it more efficiently, so value for money was coming in. So you've gone more and more centralized inside corporate organizations, which is everything counter to what innovation comes from. And so now you have companies receiving all this pressure to learn how to innovate, and they're countercultural. So you have processes and hierarchies, back to your term, that have been set up for one business model that won't work in that. So your Gartner describes it as a bimodal supply chain, the ninja and the samurai. Look that up. Look up bimodal supply chain, get the image. Gartner gets all full credit on it. It tells a story of how innovation happens. So can you as a company alter the way you run your business process? And I think for most of us, we're having to teach our customers how to change the way they run their business if they want to secure the talent they want in a way that they want and in a way that the talent wants to be engaged.
That's an excellent point. It is the human touch with the technology. It has to go hand in hand. And I think the human touch that makes the most difference in our business space would be where we come in and we share with our clients what others are doing and push them out of their comfort zone and have them try different things. And my latest push is to allow internal recruiters to poach internally and move somebody within a company. How cool would that be, right? Today, they're called from external recruiters. Your people are calling my people are calling your people, but nobody internally is tapping you on the shoulder and saying, there's a pretty cool opportunity for you over here. Why don't you think about moving? Because we're all worried about the political. Oh, he works for Bob, and Bob's an executive, and he's connected to Jane, and that's terrible, don't do it. I think the future will be that poaching internally piece and moving people around.
I just want to say that Fidelity's doing that right now with mobility, and they're actually allowing people to poach from place to place, and they're actually doing some interesting stuff on job
Yeah,
share.
it's the future for sure. Yeah. It is back to the future, yes.
Yeah.
Not a good HR person who's a traffic cop in the best way.
Yeah.
Who cares about people, he or she will move you, and Google does it.
Yeah. And I think the more frequently that happens, and meaning frequently in terms of compression of time, 12 to 18 months, 24 is a little too long.
Yeah.
The companies that know how to do that, what we just talked about very well, and give the technology investment, and also encourage the individuals to look elsewhere within the business and perhaps even externally, open-minded, that will create a lot of membership and strong retention
And
as
that
well.
goes to caring about your employee that you mentioned earlier. It's not just caring about your business primarily. It's very much about the person first and the company
Yeah.
second, in my opinion. That can be limiting.
Yeah, we talked a
It
lot
works
about
for me, but it might not work for everybody, but I believe people first.
Well, and the internal posting works, but it's not the same as a recruiter calling you cold and making you feel like a rock star.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
you were
12 or 18
hand-selected.
months, and so allowing this to happen internally actually creates a nice culture.
Yeah.
So Adam, I'll come back to you. So we started all of this by talking about the endless list of threats that have faced the staffing industry, the meteors, the LinkedIns, the all trends and technologies. And we've successfully beat back all of those as being any potential threats for the staffing industry. So the staffing industry must be solid and infallible. Surely there must be something that keeps you up at night that you see on the horizon that poses a threat to the way that we do business.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is how do you aggregate all of those disparate technologies into some manageable ecosystem? And not only that, the cost of all those technologies is probably $2.5 billion of venture capital funds that are coming into the staffing industry year over year. You guys know it as well. So I can tell you what we've done. We have essentially built linkage between all of those technologies to create a single sign-on experience. So it's less diversity of recruiters going out and touching various technologies versus all of those technologies aggregating into one common environment. But yeah, that definitely keeps us up. And actually, the good news is that some of those technologies are pretty sophisticated pieces of middleware, so you can flip out and move in as fast as you can. But it does cost significant cost when you do that, and a lot of disruption as well to the business. So I think disruption to the business and delivery to the client within the same timelines using technology is very complex. So it's available, it's easy when done right, but it is the variety of opportunities out there. It can be overwhelming. Same thing for clients. Clients are having a lot of trouble. They come to us with that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a panel right before this one that was actually about all this technology that we're talking about. And they're expressing similar issues, which is everyone wants an integrated experience, but for certain things, you need to go for solutions of innovation, what we used to call best of breed solutions, et cetera. And so there's kind of this endless cycle of new things being put into the ecosystem. I'm curious, there's been a lot of work on two key technologies that could have a significant impact on this. One is UXP, the user experience platform, which people aren't really talking about very much in the HCM space, but seems to hold a lot of promise for creating a unified, kind of experience. And the other is just unifying the data layer through technology such as blockchain. Yeah. And so, do any of you feel that we're maybe on the verge of a final integration breakthrough?
I'm a big fan of blockchain. I think that data privacy is going to be the driver to bring it into our industry. But if you look at enterprise human capital software, I think you'll see Larry Ellison buy up the first 50 and kill them before he'll let any of them get through. Because to truly have a distributed ledger amongst workforce, you're talking about eliminating PeopleSoft from every one of our corporate clients for that to become real. So I think you're going to see it seeded into some small areas through small to mid-sized businesses. You're starting to see that emerge already, and then eventually you'll see a shift. And I think watching Mark Zuckerberg testify in front of Congress is the kind of thing that's going to cause people to think differently.
Well, John, sticking with you for a moment, bringing this to a fine point as we near the end, what is the future of work, and what lens should companies use to assess it through?
So the research we do in trying to understand the future of work, and our piece on this is it's lean into the change that's coming is what we have to do. And we see the change really across 4 dimensions. One is the workforce, one is the workplace, third is technology, and the fourth is social norms. And we think people need to spend much more time thinking about the social norms and the physical workplace, the place that we go to look at work. There's a lot of attention on technology, there's a lot of attention on the workforce, but if you don't balance those 2 other areas of disruption out, you'll miss a big part of the change.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, it was at a WeWork facility. It was wonderful. We operate out of one in London. Watched an individual be terminated on a Friday. It was a very ugly situation. It was very public that this individual was being terminated. The following Tuesday, they showed back up at the same location, and they had someone screaming, saying, "You're not allowed in here." And they said, "No, I am. I have a WeWork pass." And if you've ever been in a WeWork environment, all of their walls are glass. So suddenly, this company that thought they had this unique co-working environment realized, uh-oh, my IP is no longer protected anywhere here. So the idea of the agility that I do on one side, and then realizing that this remote work thing is happening in a different way, just hadn't spent any time thinking about what the possible unintended consequences could be.
And Eleanor, do you think there's a role for the staffing industry to play in issues like that?
Yes. I mean, not just in issues like that, but I think, I mean, the staffing industry and kind of this moment in time that we have, right, with technology and flexibility in work, right, and all the problems that are surfacing that we were once shy about talking about, but now open about sharing, we're now being able to collect the different ways that we can solve those problems. And there's a collaboration aspect to it, but also, I mean, even just now, this is a huge moment, right? To be able to share and open the doors and kind of sneak behind the curtain to see what you're doing and what keeps you up at night and what you're talking about with your clients and your candidates. I mean, honestly, we're probably sharing a lot of those candidates and those clients, right, across all of our companies. But I think the staffing industry as a whole, we have two main responsibilities, and the way that we can really continue to change and be relevant is one with the clients, being able to, like to Adam's point, talk through what are these technologies and how can these technologies help change the process, enhance your people, and then help evolve and solve the problems that they're trying to solve with their core business, right? Because people are still at the center of their strategy. So we're not just going to staff them with temporary workers, but we're going to help evolve their talent development, retrain, and then also suggest what other types of basically solutions will help them get their outcome, their business outcome faster, whether that's robotics, whether that's a virtual assistant, or whether that's a chatbot. On the second side is the candidates. We're not just going to find them that temporary job or that one career that will take them to retirement, but we're also going to help guide them and be their career coach and upskill and retrain, and then also help them be better leaders and identify those gaps within their own people, and then help them. So we're constantly changing and evolving the workspace. So, I mean, it's a huge role that we play. I mean, we kind of have a really big role in all of this, and I think as long as we are open to that and continue to collaborate, I think our relevance will not be a question in 2030 or 2050.
Well, in closing, I would like to get each of you to answer this question since we're here because of our clients, right?
Yeah.
All of us, and that's a responsibility and a privilege. What do you think is, because we all have great clients and all of our clients always behave in their own best interest. What advice would you give to a client to get the most out of their relationship with their staffing partner?
Start with me. I'd say don't stand behind the technology too much. It's a people business. It still requires people to interview individuals, to recommend individuals, to be good sourcers. Understanding you can't get culture through the technology. So there's so much today that I see happening electronically, which is good because it's speed to market, right? But there still needs to be that human interaction in order to make it an efficient process on the tail end.
Eleanor?
I think it's be open. Show your vulnerability on what you're lacking, where are you struggling, and then let's be problem identifiers together, and then we can come up with the right solution together in partnership. But that can only be done when you let your guard down and just be a little bit vulnerable, and then let that strength across the table shine through.
I would just say receptivity to changing, despite maybe some predisposition to what the strategic goal or objective might be. All of us up here are looking at technology and a variety of different things in the market on an ongoing basis that some clients come to us for that particular transaction, so to speak, versus really coming to us with how do we put together some kind of a bigger, broader solution that can really help them meet their goals. So that receptivity to the change of how they get to the outcome versus just coming to us for the goal or the transaction, if you will. Yeah.
Thank you. Katie?
Twofold. So we were hired because we can probably do it better, faster, and likely cheaper. Unfortunately, I hate to say the word cheaper, but there it is. So trust us would be part one, and part two would be treat us like family. When they do, it works out so much better. We're there to take on your recruiting and do the work that you've chosen not to do for a variety of reasons. And if you treat us like part of your organization, then we become part of your organization, and it works out great for everybody.
John?
It's a hard process. Be willing to challenge yourself internally. Be willing to challenge us as a provider to help you think differently and to see things in a different way. And enjoy the ride. We're going to run into bumps together, and let's go through them, but let's solve them together.
Well, thank you very much for choosing to spend your time with us today, and please help me thank our panel. You guys were great. Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.